And welcome to Chapter 4 in our Consumer Behavior course. So far in this course, we have looked at the introduction to consumer behavior, why it's so important to know for marketers. We've looked at ethical issues, corporate social responsibility, sustainability, um, unethical behavior on the consumer's part, and different things. And then last week we looked at perception and helping us build more knowledge to help us with positioning of brands. And this week in Chapter 4, we're going to look at learning and memory. Our objectives for this particular chapter is to understand how consumers learn about products and services, some conditioning results in learning, associations with brands and how they generalize to other products, and the difference between what we call classical and instrumental conditioning, and how both of those help consumers learn about products. We're also going to learn about products by observing other people's behaviors, and then some things about how our brains process information in regards to memory, um, how we associate with the individual product influence and how we remember it, um, how products will help us retrieve memories from our past, and in the marketing world, we learn how to measure the memories of consumers about products and ads. Okay, so learning is a relatively permanent change in behavior caused by experience. The experience can be direct or it can be observed. Learning is an ongoing process. The way that we learn is from intentional learning or incidental learning. And we're going to look at both of those and the different theories in regards to those. So the first one we'll look at is conditional results in learning. Behavioral learning theories assume that learning takes place as a result of responses to external events. Psychologists who subscribe to this viewpoint do not focus on internal thought processes. Instead, they approach the mind as a black box and emphasize the observable aspects of behavior. The observable aspects consist of things that go into the box, the stimuli or events perceived from the outside world, and things that come out of the box, the responses or reactions to those stimuli. There are several learning theories which range from those that focus on connection between actions and consequences to those that focus on understanding complex relationships and problem solving. We'll look at the behavioral learning theories on both of these. So the types of behavioral learning theories, we have the classical conditioning, in which a stimulus that elicits a response is paired with another stimulus that initially does not elicit a response on its own. Instrumental conditioning, also called operant conditioning. This is when an individual learns to perform behaviors that produce positive outcomes and to avoid those that yield negative outcomes. All right, so classical conditioning. This occurs when a stimulus that elicits a response is paired with another stimulus that initially does not elicit a response on its own. Over time, the second stimulus causes a similar response because we associate it with the first stimulus. You may have heard of Pavlov's experiment he did with dogs. He was Ivan Pavlov was a Russian psychologist who conducted research on digestion in animals. And so he first demonstrated this phenomenon in dogs. He paired a neutral stimulus, a bell, with a stimulus known to cause a salivation response in dogs. The powder was an unconditioned stimulus, a UCS is what it's the abbreviation, because it was natural capability of causing the response. Over time, the bell became a conditioned stimulus. The bell did not initially cause the salivation, but the dog learned to associate the bell with the meat powder and began to salivate at the sound of the bell only. The drooling of these canine consumers, because of a sound, was a conditioned response. Stimulus generalization refers to the tendency of stimuli similar to a conditioned stimuli to evoke similar conditioned responses. For example, so Pavlov noticed in subsequent studies that his dogs would sometimes salivate when they heard noises that only vaguely resembled a bell, such as keys jingling. So people also react to other similar stimuli in much the same way they responded to the original stimuli. We call this the generalization, a halo effect. Stimulus discrimination occurs when the unconditional stimulus does not follow the stimulus similar to the conditional stimulus. And this happens, reactions weaken and soon disappear. Brand equity, which is really important, is when a brand has strong positive associations in a consumer's memory and commands a lot of loyalty as a result. A lot of packaging strategies used in the book talks to us about that is some of your off-brand packaging products will use packaging that's very similar to the major brands, and so this halo effect makes consumers feel that the off-brand is equivalent to the national brand. So how might classical conditioning operate for a customer who sees each of the following prints? Okay, let's take a look at this. Print ads. So this is for Smart Water, inspired by the clouds for a clean, crisp taste. Okay, so we have the different types of stimuli. You've got the clouds as the unconditional and the Smart Water as the conditional. How does that help consumers relate? Now let's look at a similar ad from Smart Water in where they use Jennifer Aniston. Which one of these do you think is the most effective? So we also do learned association with brands generalized to other products. Behavioral learning principles apply to many consumer phenomena, such as creating a distinctive brand image or linking a product to an underlying need. The transfer of meaning from an unconditioned stimulus to a conditioned stimulus explains why made-up brand names such as Marlboro, Coca-Cola, or Reebok exert such powerful effects on consumers. The association between Marlboro Man and the cigarette is so strong that in some cases the company no longer even bothers to include the brand name. In its ads just feature the cowboy riding off into the sunset. You can think about that with brand logos, songs that are used in commercials, different things that help people associate the brand with other products. Conditioning effects are more likely to occur after the conditioned stimulus and the unconditioned stimulus have been paired several times. So repeated exposures to the association increases the strength of the association and prevent decay of the associations in memory. Many classic advertising campaigns consist of product slogans repeated often to enhance recall. The Rolaids campaign, which asks, "How do you spell relief?" Rolaids is a personal favorite. But for this to work, the UCS must repeatedly be paired with the CS. Otherwise, extinction occurs. Extinction means that the association is forgotten. Even when associations are established, too much exposure can turn negative. In that case, the association might change in terms of whether it is perceived as positive or negative. That's what happened to Izod when its logo became overexposed on a variety of clothing and products. So, stimulus generalization, it's the tendency for stimuli similar to a conditioned stimulus to invoke similar or unconditioned responses. The process is critical to branding and packaging decisions that try to capitalize on consumers' positive associations with an existing brand or company name. Marketers can base some strategies on stimulus generalization. Family branding enables products to capitalize on the reputation of a company name. Marketers can use product line extensions by adding related products to an established brand. Licensing allows companies to rent well-known names, and distinctive packaging designs create very strong associations with particular brands. Companies that make generic or private label brands and want to communicate a quality image often exploit this linkage when they put their products in similar packages of those of popular brands, as I've already mentioned. Next time you go to the store, check that out and see what your thoughts are in regards to the generic brands next to the national brands. See if their packaging actually helps you generalize and stimulates your thought process there a little bit. All right, so another reflection. So some advertisers use well-known songs to promote their products. They often pay more for the song than the original compositions. So how do you react when one of your favorite songs turns up in a commercial? Think about it. And why do advertisers do this? How does all this relate to learning theory? All right, here is an example of one of my favorite ad campaigns is Chevy's Like a Rock. And they used a song written by Bob Seger, Like a Rock. I don't know if you've experienced this commercial or not, but you can see them on YouTube. The ad campaign actually ran from 1991 to 2004, and it was one of the longest running ad campaigns in history and very, very successful for Chevy. I'm going to include a link to some more information about this particular ad campaign, but they used that song for so much and for so long that it actually changed the image of Bob Seger's song. That anytime you heard that song, you instantly thought of Chevy. You associated that song. So Bob Seger's song kind of lost its identity in that it was so strongly related to Chevy. All right, instrumental conditioning or operant conditioning occurs when we learn to perform behaviors that produce positive outcomes and avoid those that yield negative outcomes. We associate this learning process with the psychologist B.F. Skinner, who demonstrated the effects of instrumental conditioning when he taught pigeons and other animals to dance and perform other activities when he systematically rewarded them for desired behaviors. Responses to classical conditioning are fairly simple and involuntary, but the responses we make to instrumental conditioning are related to obtaining a goal. We may learn the desired behavior over a period of time as a shaping process rewards our immediate actions. One way that instrumental conditioning may occur is through a positive reinforcement strategy. So as I've already alluded to, instrumental conditioning occurs to one of three ways. It's positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, and punishment. Positive reinforcement comes in the form of a reward. Negative reinforcement shows how a negative outcome can be avoided. Punishment occurs when unpleasant events follow a response. Extinction occurs when there is no reinforcement at all. In other words, the conditioning is not activated because it's not reinforced. This figure will help you to reinforce the relationships among these four conditions. In addition to deciding whether to use positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, or punishment, marketers also have to decide on a schedule. Marketers need to determine the most effective reinforcement schedule to use because this decision relates to the amount of effort and resources they have to devote when they reward consumers who respond as they hope to their requests. Several schedules are possible, as you can see with the different lines, arrows between the boxes. And we can see the different um, uh, strategies involved here. In we have what we call a fixed interval reinforcement. We also have a variable interval reinforcement, and the ratio schedule and the variable ratio schedule. And these are all, of course, included in the textbook, and they're very interesting to read about. So I encourage you to take a look at those and learn more about reinforcement. Our textbook also shares research that stated that a consumer must be exposed to an advertisement at least 3 times for it to make an effect. However, I've read other research that states the frequency of an advertisement must be higher, an exposure of at least 7 times to take an effect. This is one of the underlying principles of integrative marketing communications, in that using multiple media to increase that frequency provides ultimate effectiveness. Gamification. I bet every one of you have in some way or another experienced this. It is a fast-growing strategy that turns routine actions into experiences as it adds gaming elements to tasks that might otherwise be boring or routine. In Dowd Progress Effect, a car wash gave one set of consumers a buy 8, get 1 free card, while the second set of customers got a 10 wash card that had been punched twice. A dynamic digital environment, whether in store, on a laptop or tablet or phone, it resembles a sophisticated video game platform. Multiple short and long-term goals, rapid and frequent feedback, a reward for most or all efforts in the form of a badge or virtual product, friendly competition in a low-risk environment, and a manageable degree of uncertainty. One example for store and brand loyalty is Foursquare. I don't know if any of you use that app or not. I know it was really popular there a few years ago. Not so sure if it's as popular as it used to be, but it gives people a virtual badge when they click in at a local cafe or restaurant. Some of them check in as often as they can to compete for the honor of being named mayor of that location. Social marketing, more than 75 utilities use service from a company called O-Power that awards badges to customers when they reduce their energy consumption. Customers can compare their progress with their neighbors and broadcast their achievements on Facebook. So there's a lot of different cool ways you can use gamification in marketing strategies. What kind of reinforcement is used in stores that offer loyalty programs? And can you provide an example and identify the reinforcement approach being used? Think of, let's see, Kroger's has a card um, that you can get um, right there in Buchanan. Sheets, you can get a card through them. B-Dubs has an app. There's a lot of different ways that um, companies use this reinforcement to encourage customers to keep coming back. So cognitive learning theory, that it deals with the internal learning process, and we learn about products by observing others' behavior. Think about that as you kind of revisit your history and look at what your parents purchased and how they made purchases, and if that helped you, that those observations help mold your behavior. And the 4 steps involved is attention. When we're dealing with marketing, is we want to capture the customer's the customer focuses on the model's behavior, and then they retain that behavior in their memory. The customer has the ability to perform the behavior, and then when the stimulus arises, a trigger, the behavior is useful to the customer. And that is when observational learning has occurred. Observational learning occurs when we watch the actions of others and note the reinforcement they receive for their behaviors. In these situations, learning occurs as a result of vicarious rather than direct experience. This type of learning is a very complex process. People store these observations in memory as they accumulate knowledge and when they use this information at a later point to guide their own behavior. Particularly when we are preoccupied with other demands, we are likely to mimic others' behaviors as a social default. Modeling, not the runway kind, is the process of imitating the behavior of others. So think about maybe the vehicle you drive. Did your dad, was he a big fan of Chevy and hated Ford, or vice versa? So now you drive this, you're brand loyal to the particular vehicle your dad drove. Maybe your mom used Maybelline makeup, and so that's kind of the brand that you like to use because you watched her put that on. Or perhaps they were big sports fans for a particular team, Pittsburgh Steelers or whatever, and you grew up being a Pittsburgh Steelers fan just by observing their behavior. And parents exhibit different styles when they socialize their children. They may be authoritarian, neglecting, or indulgent. And you can read about each of these in the textbook. I'm really running over on time, so I'm going to kind of go through these fairly quickly. This deals with the 5 stages of consumer development in regards to different ages, from infant all the way up to age 8, and how learning develops for consumers at even that young of an age. So our cognitive development, remember cognitive is all about the brain, thinking, internal. Um, the 3 different levels we have: limited, in which children are younger than 6 and do not employ storage and retrieval really strategies. Cued are children between the ages of 6 and 12 employ these strategies, but only when prompted to do so. So if you remind them of something, then they will retrieve information. And then in strategic, the 3rd level, children 12 and over spontaneously employ storage and retrieval strategies. So, how did your parents influence your development as a consumer? Did they teach you to be thrifty? Did they treat you or teach you to buy only the top quality products? Um, my kids will tell you that I taught them to shop off the sales rack right off the bat, right out of the bat. They go to the clearance racks first. So memory is our next section, and it's a process of acquiring information and storing it over time so it'll be available when we need it. Many people assume that the mind works with an information processing approach. Data are input, processed, and output for later use in revised form. We have the encoding stage, in which information enters in a way the system will recognize. And then we have the storage phase, in which we integrate that knowledge with what is already in memory and kind of warehouse it until it's needed. And then the retrieval stage, we access the information that we want. And the book also goes further into episodic memories, narratives, and activation models of memory as well. Um, a narrative is a description of a product that's written as a story, and it's often a very effective way to convey product information. Storytelling is a commonly used strategy today in marketing. The activation model of memory explain it depending on the nature of the processing task. Different levels of processing occur that activates some aspects of memory rather than others. And this diagram that you can find again in your book shows you the different levels of memory. We've got sensory, short-term, and long-term, and how each one lasts. You know, sensory is your shortest. It can last just seconds. You know, you smell something or hear something that triggers a memory, and then it moves into short-term memory that is a little bit longer, and then long-term memory is relatively permanent storage of information. As you continue through the textbook, you look at how other products we associate with individual product with an individual product influence and how we will remember it. This diagram is kind of interesting in regards to perfumes. You know, it allows you to see the connection between certain scent types, possibly, and how those branch out in different ways and associate with different meanings. A marketing spreading activation, a marketing message may activate your memory of a brand directly or indirectly. If it activates a node, which you'll learn about that in your textbook, it will also activate other linked nodes, such as tapping a spider's web on the spot sends movement through the whole web. The process of spreading activation allows us to shift back and forth among levels of meaning. The way we store a piece of information in memory depends on the type of meaning we initially assign to it. The meaning type then determines how and when something activates that meaning. We have different meaning types listed here. Um, brand, brand specific meaning refers to memory stored in terms of the claims of the brand makers. Ad specific meaning refers to the memory stored in terms of a medium or content of the ad itself, something like the Chevy's like a rock. Brand identification is memory stored in terms of the brand name. Product category meaning is memory stored in terms of how the product works or where it should be used. And finally, evaluative reactions in memory stored as positive or negative reactions. So if you had a good experience with a product, it would be positive. Bad experience would be negative. Um, the book also talks about different levels of knowledge, the schema, which we talked a little bit about in chapter 3, the cognitive framework that we develop through experience. A script is a sequence of events an individual expects to occur, and as consumers, we learn service scripts that guide our behavior in commercial settings. So, like when you go through the drive-through at McDonald's, there's this certain script that you expect to go through. You pull up to the little box and they ask for your order, and you give your order, and you expect to hear a thank you or whatever, and then you go to the first window and you pay, you go to the second window, you get your product and whatever. And when those scripts are disruptive, if something doesn't occur as it should, it can cause confusion for your customers. The textbook also talks about different types of brands, pioneering brands, which are your first ones out, your follower brands, follow those brands, and then the spacing effect describes the tendency for us to recall printed material more effectively when the advertiser repeats the target item periodically rather than presenting it repeatedly for a short time period. Then the next section of the book talks a little bit about forgetting. A lot of that has to do with age, I think, as I seem to forget more and more every year. But we have decay, interference, state-dependent retrieval, highlighted effect, salience, the von Ristorff effect, mixed in unipolar emotions, and hybrid ads. Say hello to Gracie. She's really wanting to sit on this evening. And then finally, how we measure memories of products and ads. This is really challenging for marketers, but it's very important. We have what we call recognition and recall. How do we know if our marketing messages are designed to help consumers remember them? We can measure recognition and recall. In a typical recognition test, researchers show ads to subjects one at a time and ask if they've seen them before. You might see that on Facebook sometimes. I've been asked that 3 or 4 times if I have, though it just comes up as a post with a simple question, have you seen an ad recently for whatever? And actually, that would be your recall test, where you ask consumers to independently think of what they've seen without the prompting first. So the Facebook questions, they don't actually show the ad, at least the ones I've experienced. So that would kind of be the recall. The recognition tests usually are more promising because it triggers the memory a lot quicker than just asking someone to do a full out recall of what they've seen. So quick reflection. So think of 3 of your favorite foods. And what memories do you have associated to those foods? Was it a food that you ate when you were a kid? Was it something that grandma always made special for you? You know, was it related to a certain event, maybe Christmas or St. Patrick's Day is here in the slide, tailgating, whatever. Those things, when a brand can recognize those associations, they can use that in their marketing messages to trigger the memory of consumers and help dig into those memories and be more effective. And speaking of that, we have resurrect popular characters to evoke those fond memories of the past. They use nostalgia and retro brand. We see, and I know I talk a lot about sports, but it is kind of football season. So you see a lot of the professional teams and sometimes the college teams will dig out their old uniforms from decades back, to kind of show off their retro brand and uh, build up a little nostalgia with their fans. Okay, so that's it for chapter 4. Went a little longer than I had planned. I apologize. But there's a lot of information in this chapter. So for this week, you're still doing just a discussion post and a test. Here in a couple weeks, you'll have another writing assignment. I'll be getting that up very, very soon so you can start thinking about it. Please do be reading your book, and the final instructions for the final project is now up, so you can see what you need to be keeping notes on as you read the book. An outline will be due for it along with the resources, external resources you're going to use will need to be submitted here within, I think, maybe 3 weeks, something. So keep moving on and digging deep into this psychological world of consumer behavior. Let me know if you have any questions, and have a great, great week. Bye.